actually making a documentary right now on the making of The Outsiders. Y'all are part of it. You know, I'm asked all the time, what is it about this book, about this movie that affects so many people? I mean, I've seen 1 million stay gold tattoos in my life, I swear. I've told stories all the time about, you know, how people didn't read until they read this book. Yet filled with sorrow. You know, it's such an important movie for family. And, not imagine, you know, I've seen this thing so many times now, but the innocence that comes out of these relationships is so something we don't see a lot of in films. And I think the kids really relate to that. It's hard for me to believe that Essie Hinton was 16 years old when she wrote this book, right? And I tell that to kids all the time. I said, let that be a lesson for all of us, really. But, you know, the young people today, they focus way too much on worrying about what other people think and not setting that bar high enough for themselves or believing in themselves. And if Essie Hinton, if she went and was concerned about what other people thought, and I'm sure she had a lot of naysayers, people saying, you know, hey, what are you doing writing a book about a gang of hoods from the other side of the track, right? Stick to what you know. We wouldn't have had The Outsiders. And here's a fun fact. She flunked creative writing the year she wrote The Outsiders. It's pretty hard to believe, but true. I'll share a few moments, a few more stories with you, and then we'll get into this Q&A. And Q&As work better if y'all have the Q's, and I'll give the A's, right? So think about that a little bit. Patrick Swayze and I did 3 pictures together. Rest his soul. He's like a brother to me. We did The Outsiders. We did Red Dawn. We did a movie that I'm sure nobody's seen called Grandview, USA. Jamie Lee Curtis. My father was a stunt coordinator his whole life. And he did a movie in 1978 called Urban Cowboy. I was 11 years old. I went to Houston, and I was with my father that summer on the set of Urban Cowboy. And a young woman was a dance choreographer on the show named Patsy Swayze. Her son, Patrick, was on the set every day teaching John Travolta and Deborah Winger how to do the two-step and taking care of me when I was 11. A good 3 years before we ever knew we'd do a movie together. I didn't even know I was going to be an actor. He was still, you know, trying to figure out what he wanted to be. So by the time we got onto the set of The Outsiders, we were really like brothers. And, you know, the process that we all went through. In fact, I want to bring up my buddy Darren. I think Leif went home. It's such a Leif move.
Once he died, he was like, I'm out.
Yeah, once he died, he was like, I gotta go. Yeah. And I'll let Darren share his perspective on this, but the casting process, the auditioning process of this movie was unlike anything we'd ever been a part of before or since. And it was such an amazing experience for me, in particularly, because usually when you went on an audition, you go into a casting office, and there'd be 10 guys that looked sort of like you, and you could hear them when they go in, and they're acting up a storm, and you're like, shit, I was gonna do it like that. What am I gonna do? But this was a very different experience because Francis Ford Coppola, he owned his own studio, and it was called Zoetrope. And on this day of casting, he brought in 40 or 50 of the youngest, hottest stars today. Then there were nobodies. People like Robert Downey Jr., Val Kilmer, Mickey Rourke, Dennis Quaid, Michael Anthony Hall. The list goes on and on and on. Tom Cruise. And there was a makeshift set built in this studio. And there were some video cameras, and he was shooting everything. And he'd point to you and he'd be like, okay, Darren, you're going to play Dally, and Tom Cruise, you're going to play Derry, and Tommy, you're going to play Pony Boy. Well, that's all I ever read. I was too young. But we sort of workshopped the auditions while everybody stood around and watched, and that was unheard of at the time. So I'd sit there and I'd watch people like Mickey Rourke working with Val Kilmer and brilliant young actors. And this process took a few weeks, and I traveled a little bit to a few different cities before we came up with that core group of guys. And one of my favorite stories, and Darren will reiterate, but I'm going to just share it with you. They went to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where Darren is from. And they were casting in many, many cities. And Darren was one of the top dogs of his drama department in high school. And a buddy of his had an audition for The Outsiders and said, hey, you have a car, can you drive me to the audition? And he's like, sure, I'll drive you. And his buddy goes in and he's auditioning, and as that's taking place, Darren's sitting out in the hallway when the casting lady pokes her head out and says, are you next? He says, oh, no, I just drove my friend here. She says, oh, you're not an actor? He says, well, I'm an actor, but I don't have an appointment. She goes, well, here, read these pages and come on in and we'll put you on tape. And the son of a bitch got the job. Right? Will you reiterate a little bit on that?
It's true. He didn't even get a call back, so I find his mud around town. But yeah, it was from my perspective too, to be flown out to Los Angeles, then and to walk into that sound stage with all those people and all those faces. I thought it was going to be a bunch of people like myself. I wouldn't recognize anybody, and all of a sudden I was like, whoa, that's Scott Baio. But I mean, so everybody was there, and I never read the role that I actually played in the auditions. But I loved we didn't just read the script, we improvised. And Francis would be there and talking through it. One of my most vivid memories is Mickey Rourke's audition, because Francis was playing the doctor and Mickey was playing Dally when Johnny died in the audition. And I remember Francis talking him through it and improvising with him and Mickey Rourke. And I'm whatever, 16, I think I turned 17 in New York during the audition process. And I just was blown away by what you saw. And again, we've been doing it for a long time since, and I've never seen anything like it. So it brought everybody together, and it just showed you, I think it just kind of underlined who Coppola is as a filmmaker. He was willing to go the extra mile to put that together, but it's amazing.
Let's take a few questions, and it's always the first one or two that's tough. People's hands are kind of heavy, but once we get through one or two, everybody will have a question. So don't be shy. Yeah, right here.
How was it working with Ralph?
How was it working with Ralph? Terrible. I taught him everything he knows.
Ralph's intense, man.
I'll tell you, poor Ralph. First of all, he was 21. I was 14. Right? He'd go home after work, have a beer. I'd ask for a quarter to play Pac-Man. But I'll tell you this about Ralph. God bless him. Ralph is the one that taught me how to break down a character, how to approach a scene. He knew what we were doing. He knew who Francis was. I didn't care, I was like, Francis Ford who? When you're 14, you're cast in a movie because they think you're the character, right? You're not really thinking outside the box. It's not like I was playing George Foyet, the Reaper. I was playing Pony Boy, right? So for me, I had people like Emilio Estevez and Ralph teach me things that I still draw from today. Emilio thought outside the box. Things like that moment that I pointed out where the hat blew off the cameraman and he goes and runs and puts it on his head. Matt falls off the chair and Francis keeps rolling and I break character and think, okay, we're gonna stop. And Francis brings me over. He says, Tommy, don't ever cut, no matter what happens. He said, I'd be working with Marlon Brando and a herd of wild buffalo would run through the set and Marlon would just say, look at the pretty buffalo. I said, okay, I understand. Emilio had the knack for all those jokes. I mean, he played the funny guy, but he brought all that. None of that stuff was written. You know, when he turns to Darren, he says, hey, I heard they use your face to stamp gorilla cookies. Right? You know, look at their pants, all that stuff. He made up on the fly. And at 14, you get a script and you think, oh, I have to do it like this. So finally, I get my beautiful moment to improvise. We're in the church, and it's an old decrepit church, and there's a dolly track, and a dolly is a heavy piece of equipment that they put the camera on to move slowly across the floor and get a nice shot of and keep the camera moving. But they're very heavy, and the floor was decrepit. And the gentleman pushing the dolly during one of our takes, and I think the line from Ponyboy to Johnny was something like, we're laying on the floor and it's nighttime. And I think the original line was something like, Johnny, are you awake? Everything's gonna be okay. And he's like, yeah, Paul, go to sleep. Well, he's creeping along and his foot goes through the floor. And I turn and look right at the guy and I go, oh shit, I can't stop. And I come up with a brilliant line. I say, Johnny. He said, yeah, Paul. I said, there's a monster outside. That was my brilliance. Francis Ford Coppola cuts to a little raccoon scratching at the wood outside. And it's one of my favorite moments, actually, as silly as it was, because it shows the innocence of these kids. And I learned from people, going back to your question, like Ralphie and Emilio, and the commitment from a guy like Tom Cruise, for example. I mean, Tom couldn't just exit the house. He'd have to do a backflip off the car, flip over the fence. I remember one day after the Rumble, I come into the house, and Tom brings a dentist with him and removes like a cap off of his tooth. And he's like, isn't this cool? Doesn't it make me look tough? And Francis said, we want you to say that in the movie. And he's got this gaping hole in his face that nobody said you had to do. He just wanted to do it, you know? These are the guys that went on to have such incredible careers, and they earned it, you know? The Outsiders was a movie about kids, for kids, before they did that. In the 60s and the 70s, they didn't make movies about kids, for kids. The 80s, that's what it was all about. John Hughes took off, you know? Darren and I went on to do Red Dawn. Wolverines! Yeah, he was the traitor. I killed him. I spent my life calling him the bug-eating Soch. And we had a great time on that project as well. But that was the time when films were developed for adolescent audiences. And we didn't have that until then. And that was a big part of my life. So,
I think that's a big part of the appeal too. You know, I see this every once in a while, and it always gets. This time it was much clearer to me. This is really about young people taking care of each other, right? There's no like it's almost you know, Linus and the Peanuts with the adults as far as the wah wah wah. You know, they're not even there, right? But it's about young people taking care of each other, and I think that's really one of the things that I grow more and more in tune with, and see that's what Susie, that's what she tapped into right there. And she says herself, she probably couldn't write the book now. She wrote it when she was 16 because it was the book that was inside her. So that's amazing.
And she was living it.
Yep.
She was living that time. And there's also a character for everybody in this movie. Whether you're a Dallas Winston fan or a Johnny fan or, you know, a Soch, whatever side of the tracks you're from, right? There's a character for everybody, and I think it's so relatable. You know, my wife and I started a foundation called the Stay Gold Foundation, and that allows me to go to schools and speak to students. And are there any teachers here tonight? We usually get a lot of teachers, and we really support you guys, and thank you so much because, you know, it's hard to keep the attention of young people today. You know, they don't need a beginning and a middle and an end in their stories anymore. TikTok has ruined that, right? You just swiping left and you're like, oh my God, nice car crash, and you keep on going. I'm able, through the foundation, to go around and travel and go to schools and speak to young kids about the importance of literacy, reading and writing. I mean, I'll sign books for them, and they'll look at it and say, what does that say? I said, oh, I'm sorry, that's called cursive. It says stay gold. Right? I'm sorry, I didn't write that with my thumbs. And that's the real issue for me. I'm a storyteller. I've been telling stories my whole life. And for me to be able to go and share something like The Outsiders, we give books away, we're working on scholarships, that's the direction we're headed. We want to help sort of preserve the importance of communication more than anything else. That's going away as well. You know, it took me 5 days to muster up the courage to ask Neil LaCroix out to the dance. Right? Today, kids are like doing it through a text while they're playing a video game with the radio on, the TV on, and, you know, she says yes or no, no big deal. For me, a yes or no was a big effing deal, man, you know? It was like heartbreaking, or it was just absolutely invigorating, either way, however it went. And that was character defining, and that helped, you know, communicating was a big part of growing up, and also getting dirty. I don't think these kids get dirty in the past 5 years, but that's the way we were raised, and you all know that. You all understand that and the importance of that, and that's why I do this, right? A lot of you come here, see the movie, to see me, but I come here to see you. And that exchange is what keeps me going. Because if I leave with my heart full, and if we're out in that line, and you come through the table, and we can have a hug, or I can look you in your eye and ask you where you're from, instead of just rushing through that process, we all feel better. I feel better. And that's the way we approach it. And this platform allows me to do that. So thank you for participating and coming and supporting me. I come and support you. Let's take a few more questions. Come on.